It occurs to me, even before I've spent hundreds of dollars on a stick and throttle, that this is the most sense a video game controller has ever made. Because, listen, we do not do the things we say we're doing in video games. We abstract that action into a simple input. We say, I swung my sword at him, when we mean, I pressed X. We do this with everything. Controlling a game is an exercise in abstraction, and sure, we're good at it. We do our best to erase the disconnect. Speech, vision, physical exertion in games, all button presses, all communicated through inputs we give to a machine. And how do we fly a jet? How do we control a 26,000-pound monster that tears through the sky at 1,000 miles an hour? Well, abstraction, of course. We go faster by more or less pressing a button. The button doesn't generate the thrust, of course, but it is the language we speak to the afterburners. We and the machine understand this language, that by a tilt of our hand we're telling it to corkscrew towards the horizon. The machine understands that by depressing a switch under our thumb, it should allow a heat-seeking missile to fall from its wing and near instantaneously accelerate towards a distant target. This is what I realize holding my controller, that I am absolutely taken by this new challenge of fluency with machine, that I am enraptured by the integration of human and mechanical, that it closes the distance between me and the experience so much more effectively than other games, that it offers me the chance to become a part of it. I push a button, thrust increases. I push a button and a missile falls from my wing. I push a button and... Several months ago, I played my first Ace Combat game, but that wasn't my first experience with the series, because I remember the ad. In October of 2007, Game Informer's issue, Dead Space on the cover, Metroid Prime 3 review, a good issue, had this full-page ad on the back for Ace Combat 6: Fires of Liberation. This was the part that got me. One of these images is real, the other two are from Ace Combat 6. Can you tell the difference? And I can, now. But I remember staring at this ad, at the audacity, second-guessing what was real and what was rendered. Ace Combat has always been a handsome series, for the same reason racing games look so good. When your main character is a machine with limited animation, when the world zips past at 1,000 miles an hour, our eyes are less likely to catch on visual imperfections. But visual fidelity has never been a required part of immersion. No, when I finally played Ace Combat 7, what pulled me into the world of the game, more than volumetric clouds and material-accurate reflections, was the sense of control. I have never played a game that asks you to consider the mechanics of movement in quite this way. I'm going to explain to you what I find so magnificent, so compelling about this game, this series. But first I have to tell you about being bad at it. The most challenging first antagonist in any Ace Combat game is also the most omnipresent, the ground. In my early hours with Ace Combat 7, I was not taken down by enemy missiles or anti-aircraft fire nearly as much as I smashed myself into the forest, the ocean, the mountains. Being handed total freedom in the air, except for this one unbreakable rule, was dizzying. Pursuing enemy fighters required a sort of wild abandon, a willingness to spin myself over and over, to dive into the sky with a singular focus, and yet, at the same time, each dogfight required an understanding of my machinic body in space, how I was positioned in relation to my enemy, the ground, and the homing missiles attached to my wings. Because of the difficulty of remembering all this, my first dozen hours or so, basically my whole first playthrough, was primarily played with the third-person camera, a perspective positioned behind my plane. I was so unfamiliar with its functioning that I needed the constant visual reminder of my position. I'm sideways, I'm upside down, I'm about to hit that radar tower.
Trigger just
less deadly, but equally challenging, was coming to terms with how long it took to turn. In a traditional shooter, moving past an enemy is barely consequential enough to be noticed. You turn around, you fire, you continue onward. Here, momentum and turning radius are essentially the whole game. Annihilating a series of ground targets in a row requires a foreknowledge of movement. I had to understand where my plane would be, how fast and at what angle it needed to approach before anything happened. Constantly, in my early hours, I would overshoot something on the ground, wheel around for another chance, and realize I had overshot it again in the opposite direction. It's for this reason that Ace Combat's most cinematic camera angle can also be its most useful. Locking my target to the center of the screen, I watched my plane strain, struggling to achieve missile lock. I needed to watch it fight against itself. I needed to understand how my body worked. Ace Combat 7 includes a concession to the challenge of turning though, one that would eventually come back to bite me, the high G turn. You might think most turns in a supersonic jet would have high G-forces, but in the game, this is actually a specific mechanic. A high G turn is performed by holding both the acceleration and brake simultaneously, causing the jet to basically spin like an office chair. There are drawbacks. The jet loses speed pretty quickly, which can send you into a stall if you're not careful, but it's basically a movement cheat code that allowed me to ignore at least some of the complications of in-air navigation. Later in the game, the cheat of the high G turn became absolutely required, as I was pitted against enemies that could reverse their direction on a whim, both of us whirling like tops in the sky. In the legacy of Ace Combat, no games are held in higher regard than the so-called Holy Trinity of PS2 titles, Ace Combat 4, 5, and 0. After losing myself in Ace Combat 7, my pilgrimage back in time to these titles was all but guaranteed. But as I traveled back to 2001, 4, and 6, I realized that this trilogy offered no high G maneuver, no way to overlook the consequences of speed and inertia. And so, I had to learn to fly again.
One day while on my way to school, I looked up in the skies. A sound like distant thunder. In the blue skies far above me, contrails drew dizzying circles around in a crazy waltz.
One of the irresistibly surreal elements of the Ace Combat series is the extent to which not just the narrative, but the entire world seems to orbit the concept of a fighter jet. They're the keystone of every political maneuver, the subject of every metaphor. An F-16 costs less than a Honda Civic. Even underground tunnels are built for the exact size and maneuverability of a plane. In an episode of the podcast, How Did This Get Made, on one of the Fast and Furious films, Jason Mantzoukas, I'm pretty sure it's Mantzoukas, observes that the only way the family is able to conceptualize their actions in the world is via car. Heists, jailbreaks, skydives, space flights, the characters essentially do not exist outside their ability to drive a car. Ace Combat works similarly, both narratively and mechanically. You will experience stealth missions, coup d'etats, escort quests, betrayals, and boss fights, all through the storytelling device of plane. What makes the most effective Ace Combat stories is their ability to balance this absurdity with an acknowledgement of how this sky-obsessed world feels on the ground. In most games in the franchise, the story is contextualized by someone other than the player-controlled pilot. In Ace Combat 4, you play as a silent protagonist named Mobius 1. You achieve total victory over all enemies through overwhelming talent and firepower. But in Ace Combat 4, the narrative is told by a boy confined to Earth, who one day witnesses a flying ace shoot down a rival jet, and then witnesses that felled jet careen into his family's home. This is the juxtaposition that runs through all of Ace Combat, sometimes intentionally. a Wind Rises-esque grappling between the beauty of aerial performance and the reality of its inevitable toll. The games want to be parables about the cost of war, but also want to allow you the fantasy of flying a country's worth of aircraft loaded with a continent's worth of explosives, to be faultless in your performance and decision-making. The protagonist of each game is silent, molded in personality only by the compliments of their fellow squad mates. Each protagonist ultimately helps bring an end to the accursed wars. You are allowed to be a perfect machine, remaining basically unsullied by the choices of humanity. My growth as a virtual pilot in the PS2 era of the series was intoxicating. The fights against rival aces went from my most dreaded sections to my most anticipated. Sometimes I would find myself thousands of feet in the sky, locked onto my rival in a spiraling flight path that I couldn't even describe. My hands had learned to outmaneuver my conscious mind. The highs of the trilogy were phenomenal. The defecting fleet of battleships, the canyon run, the assault on the military base Stonehenge. In the finale of Ace Combat 0, the final boss is the protagonist's friend, his former wingman. His plane can only be damaged from the front. I rewrote my brain once more to win. The fight was not the tactical pursuit I had trained for, it was a joust. Our metal steeds each shuddering under the strain of clashing again and again. I finished the Holy Trinity, but wasn't done with the skies, not by a long shot. In pursuit of more and greater tests, I dove into the game Project Wingman. This is not officially an Ace Combat game, but instead an obsessive love letter to the series developed by a tiny indie team. Project Wingman is spectacular, a maximalized version of the franchise with bigger weather, louder themes, more heavily armed planes. Each mission felt new and unique. I experienced, as all Project Wingman fans are familiar with, the color orange. The game also features, I realized to my fear and delight, native VR support, an even more intoxicating opportunity to blur the line between man and machine. And as I donned the helmet for Project Wingman's final mission, a one-on-one fight against a crazed enemy ace, I watched as the game erased any separation between me and my jet. In one sense, VR doesn't change too much for Project Wingman. The controls are almost identical to the non-VR version, as are the mission objectives. But as mentioned before, the biggest challenge in learning to navigate your jet is maintaining a relationship to 3D space, remembering not just the position of your own plane, but the position of the ground, the enemies you're targeting, and on the fly calculating how to correctly align all of these objects. This is why the target lock camera perspective is so useful, to help establish the distance between points in the sky. In VR though, you cannot simply hold a button to track an enemy. You need to find them manually, with your own eyes. In one sense, the VR playstyle is less precise, less exact than holding a button and locking to exactly the enemy you want to see. But even as I wildly craned my neck, I found that the field of battle inherently made more sense. I was able to predict trajectories in VR, the faux depth granted by the headset activating my brain's inherent understanding of physical movement. I relearned what it meant to navigate. I became a part of the skies. Throughout the game, if you choose to fly in a two-seater plane, you'll be joined by a weapons system officer named Prez, a fully separate character than your pilot, with her own dialogue for each mission. In the last battle, though, ripping the sky apart in pursuit of that crazed ace, Prez simply cannot hang. She apologizes as she passes out, unable to stay conscious under the sustained, impossible G-forces of the dogfight. The protagonist is unaffected. The simple read is that the player, the pilot, is stronger than Prez. We can stay conscious through any number of flips and reversals because we are just that good. But combined with the protagonist's anonymity, their unbroken silence, their refusal to characterize themselves in any way other than plain, I can't help but read this moment as underlining a more fundamental distinction. Prez passes out because she is still, basically, human. But we are the plane itself, an uncompromising, unreadable, unbreakable object. The enemy Ace's weapons tear the sky open, but it doesn't matter. He is only human. He begs me to remember him as he dies. His plane explodes in a ball of flame so angry it pushes the clouds away. I wasn't nauseous playing Project Wingman in VR until I took the helmet off. As the credits rolled, I attempted to readjust to my office, its chair, flat screens, and afternoon heat. I felt like I was going to throw up. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter is the title of a short sci-fi story published in 2020 by author Isabel Fall. It is also, the one joke. The meme I sexually identify as an attack helicopter was originally written as a sort of mocking copy pasta used by internet dickheads who would quote-unquote challenge people exploring different gender identities by saying something like, "Oh, you identify as non-binary? Well, I identify as an Apache attack helicopter. Check your vehicle privilege." The one joke. Isabel Fall's story is unfortunately known more for its context than its contents. Only days after it was published in Clark's World magazine, it was unpublished at the request of the author. She had been continuously criticized and harassed over the story by purported social justice activists who had, by and large, not read it. Fall eventually, quietly, republished it under the less provocative title Attack Helicopter, and then disappeared from the internet. And I truly hate that I have to say any of that, because what I would really like to say is the story itself is fucking excellent. What I sexually identify as an attack helicopter proposes is, what if instead of rejecting and vilifying gender nonconformity, the US military manipulated the same ideas to its advantage? Generations of queer activists fought to make gender a self-determined choice, and to undo the creeping determinism that said the way it is now is the way it always was and always must be. Generations of scientists mapped the neural wiring that motivated and encoded the gender choice, and the moment their work reached a usable stage, the moment society was ready to accept plastic gender and scientists were ready to manipulate it, the military found a new resource. Armed with functional connectome mapping and neural plastics, the military can make gender tactical. The protagonist, previously a woman named So Ji-hee, is now Barb, a flight warrant officer, quote, harnessed and catheterized into the narrow tandem cockpit of a Boeing AH-70 Apache Mystic. This transition is a strange one. It's not that Barb is a consciousness implanted into the structure of the helicopter. Barb still has a human body, still disembarks the Apache and goes home and sleeps. It's more that the way they think has been helicopterized. The training that used to enforce the construct of womanhood rewired. I'm comfortable in open spaces, but only if there's terrain to break it up, they say. I hate conversations I haven't started. The story is, of course, about gender. It metaphorizes the weaponization of gender into the weaponization of Sidewinder missiles and 30mm cannons. It traffics in the language of implicit threats, of rape. An explosive penetrates a school building. A jet in pursuit is a stranger in the dark. A plasma-sheathed stealth technology is the keys between your fingers. There is the comfort of being something else, sharper, stronger, a new-made thing, exquisite and formidable. Fall writes, destroying something feels like passing, walking down the street in the right clothes. The Apache is my body now, and like most bodies, it is sensual. Fabric armor that stiffens beneath my probing fingers, stub wings clustered with ordnance, rotors so light and strong they do not even droop, as artificial looking to an older pilot as breast implants. And while roles and genders may be manipulatable, they are still rigidly enforced. Barb's partner, Axis, the gunner of the Apache, is having doubts about the work they do, the violence they commit. These doubts are a critical threat to the mission. Axis is labeled dysphoric. But within all the ideas of militarized gender and genderized violence, there is the desire, the smothering yearn for proficiency. Part of the reason for the military's gender reassignment to its weapons platforms, rather than traditional training, is our built-in aptitude for understanding gender as a system. Many of you are veterans in the act of gender. You weigh the gaze and disposition of strangers in a subway car and select where to stand, how often to look up, how to accept or reject conversation. Like a frequency-hopping radar, you modulate your attention for the people in your context. Do not look too much lest you seem interested or alarming. You regulate your yawns, your appetite, your toilet. You do it constantly and without failure. In the act of gender, you are aces. What other way could be better? What other neural pathways are so available to constant reprogramming, yet so deeply connected to judgment, behavior, reflex? You are aces, she writes. And what if, instead of all that skill being applied to something as maddeningly vague as socially constructed human relationships, it could be redirected to something real, something as sharp and technological and precise as a military death machine? No one even breaks your heart. With my dopamine system tied up by the reassignment surgery, fully assigned to mission behavior, I can't fall in love with anything except my own purpose. Flying is the loop of machinery and pilot, the sense of your motion on the controls translated into torque and lift, the airframe's reaction shaping your next motion until the loop closes and machine and pilot are one. Awareness collapses to the moment. You are always doing the right thing, exactly as it needs to be done. I want to get closer to my digital plane. This new way I've found of exhibiting proficiency. I play the missions over and over. I mod Ace Combat 7 until it can be played entirely in VR, a process my downloaded programs literally refer to as injection. I inject VR into the game, and there I am in the plane's cockpit, targeting software in my retinas rain on my canopy. It takes less time for my brain to adjust to VR than it did with Project Wingman. I fly more daringly, roll and spin more freely. I am shocked by how different the plane's bodies feel in ways I never noticed. The claustrophobia of the MiG-21 and the perfect clarity of the F-22. I skim my metal belly against the surface of the ocean. But in doing this, I begin to question my vessel of connection. The controller, which at first seemed so gracefully to mimic the experience of interacting with a machine, now feels simple, toy-like. So I look further. HOTAS, which stands for Hands on Throttle and Stick, is a control system that more directly approximates the feeling of controlling a plane because, instead of a video game controller, you are holding a throttle and stick. I begin to lurk in the community. Quickly, my budget triples. I learn that there is quote-unquote no point in spending small amounts of money on these controllers, the cheaper ones seemingly universally rejected. I investigate manufacturers I've never heard of before. After a few weeks, my dreams still occupied by Immelmans and missile barrages, I pull the trigger. The first to arrive is the Stex Space Throttle System Mini Plus. It costs $229, weighs over 5 pounds, and is the single nicest feeling video game peripheral I have ever owned. For days before the other pieces of my order arrive, I set the throttle next to my keyboard and marvel at its construction, pushing it back and forth, flipping its seemingly infinite switches, fantasizing about it becoming an extension of my arm. Next to show up is the Gladiator NXT Evo, a $139 joystick classified as entry-level that still requires its own assembly and feels about as high grade as any controller I've owned. The setup, too, is anything but entry-level. Both peripherals run on a piece of software called VKB Device Config, which is exceptionally flexible and useful, but has the aesthetics and the learning curve of a program made 25 years ago. Ace Combat 7, in contrast, has almost no accommodations for someone attempting to play it with HOTAS. I spent my first evening with my hundreds of dollars of equipment looking at this combination of windows. The stick and throttle do not have labels for their dozens of buttons and switches. I instead open this massive testing window, click a button to see which indicator lights up, and then copy that button's coordinates into a .ini config file for Ace Combat 7. I start the game, find the plane doesn't fly the way I want, close it and tinker, and then open it again, over and over and over. Somehow, the process of converting the entire game to VR was more simple than this. Project Wingman, to give it credit, has no such issues. And then, finally, it works, and I start the process of learning to fly over again. This genre of plane game was not designed for hands-on stick and throttle. That is a simple fact. 99% of players haven't invested in this, and an element of its arcadiness. These are not realistic games. They are designed for near-instant acceleration and deceleration, controlled by quarter-inch triggers rather than a hefty full throttle. A thumbstick can snap the plane's nose up or down at the speed of thought. A joystick requires a full movement of the arm, and yet, I could not care less. The inconvenience of physicality is the entire point here. I have sacrificed the comfort of a standard controller for the full body experience of wrangling this virtual object, and my God, after programming my new acquisitions, I get a second-hand chair, the cheapest part of the venture by far, and strap the joystick and throttle to it with industrial-strength Velcro. Behold, my throne. A standard game controller is designed to be a jack of all trades. It plays shooters, platformers, puzzle games, MMOs. This thing pretends to be a jet, exclusively. And in that purity, the abstraction of a controller vanishes. I'm dying for further immersion. I start to play solely in the plane's cockpit view, which is objectively more limited than the other two offered, but makes so much more sense. Headphones become a requirement to cut out the rest of the world, and the final step, the piece de resistance, the combination of all the initials AC7 and PW with HOTAS and VR. Disappearance into another way of being. It's kind of a tradition at the end of Ace Combat games to fly underground. It happens in 7, in 4, and 5, and 0, in 3, and 2, and 1, and 6, and it always feels to me strangely organic. That in this world of metal and asphalt, our intrusion into these tunnels is somehow entering a greater body. We fly ourselves into a concrete heart, nearly always to destroy a superweapon held within the nuclear virus that would destroy the world if not for our brave plane's intervention. Our healthy body defeats its disease-ridden one. Back in I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter, Isabel Fall's short story, Axis, the dysphoric gunner, is hesitating. I just have questions, they say. I can't think of myself as always this. Barb, the person who has had their gender reassigned as a Boeing AH-70 Apache Mystic, is shaken. Yes, we will be this way forever. We survived this mission as we survive everywhere on this hot and hostile Earth by bending all of what we are to the task, and if we use less than all of ourselves to survive, we die. Why would anyone give up something that makes this much sense? Have you ever known that you are a triumph? Barb asks. Have you ever felt that it was your whole life's purpose to do something, and all that you needed to succeed was to be entirely yourself? There is never an explicit reason given in any of these games for why the protagonist is so much more effective a pilot than every other character. It is never explained that they can sink an entire fleet of battleships because of prenatal gene splicing, or that they outmaneuvered an enemy ace because of performance-enhancing drugs. The reason is more simple, unstated. They are the best pilot because they are you. Everyone else in this world has goals, desires, anxieties outside of the cockpit. They exist as people. Not you, though. Mobius, Blaze, Cypher, Trigger, Monarch, code names for you, an entity brought into existence for one reason alone, to be a vessel of absolute airbound superiority, less a human than the very idea of flight and death. I can feel the sense of purpose throughout my body made of titanium alloys, and my country's seemingly infinite military budget. What happens after? Can there be an end? The best ending of the series, Ace Combat 5, leans into this unknown. The last mission of the game is to shoot down a satellite careening towards Earth, but the last images of the game are something else. The military base, the barracks, the command center crucial to so much fighting, abandoned. The hollow body of a civilization built for something it's outgrown. My ridiculous chair in the center of my office, cords running from my PC like a patient on life support, will soon meet a similar fate. Tucked in a corner for as long as I can fit it, then disassembled and stored in parts. My VR headset, having given me its yearly burst of transcendence, will be put back into a cabinet. As the Ace Combat series stretches on, the disarmament at the end of 5 is a future that becomes harder and harder to imagine. The 7th entry opens with a splash screen crediting all the aircraft in the game and their manufacturers: Boeing, Saab, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. I cannot see this screen without thinking of the reasons for the real production of each plane, the continued demand for machines faster than sound and deadlier than thought. The next text shown in AC7 promises that the story and events in the game are fictional, not based on actual persons or locations or political states, but it cannot make the same claim for those companies. I find the lasting piece at the end of 7's narrative less convincing than the one at the end of 5. Maybe because I know the 8th game is on the horizon. Maybe because I'm unsure that any war can be ended anymore. I wonder if I will ever see the halls of Lockheed Martin abandoned, a la the ending of Ace Combat 5. Or are these weapon manufacturers part of our society's bloodstream, pumped through the beating heart of the body necropolitic? In my individual life, I return to abstraction. With a handful of inputs, I pretend to jump and run and shoot and make choices, and the whole time, I think about what it felt like to do only one thing, and to do it well.